Is China a threat or adversary to or of Britain?
Well, thank you for having me. It's lovely to see you, and a pleasure to be here on your show. China is very clearly a threat, and it makes clear that it is a threat in a number of different ways that anybody with the eyes to see should be able to perceive. The only people who don't seem to agree with this are a small little clique of officials working in Her Majesty's Treasury who are very worried about trade and who think that upsetting China is going to damage our trade prospects. Leave them aside, there is almost complete consensus on who China is under Xi Jinping, who the Chinese Communist Party particularly is under Xi Jinping, and the threat that it poses to the UK, which you can break down in a whole bunch of areas. But I would say if you start with dependency, economic dependency, and go from there, you get a bit of a picture. So China, for quite a long period of time now, has wanted to make other nations dependent upon it so that they are able to exert and exact political and diplomatic leverage to try to make other countries more receptive to their own policy, foreign policy aims. They do that really successfully, and they have loads of countries over a barrel for things like supply of renewable energy, for example, where they've got a huge monopoly, or the processing of critical raw materials, where their monopoly is well into the 90th percentile for actually all of the world's processing of critical minerals and raw materials as well. These are key things without which we can't run stuff. We depend on China for those. And they've developed these monopolies in areas of critical infrastructure to make countries more dependent upon them so that they can get done what they want to get done. China is a country under Xi Jinping that wants to remake the global order in its own image. They believe that they have suffered a century of humiliation, as they call it, and that now is China's time to dominate the world stage, to be the global hegemon and to project those ambitions over the world. And they're doing that very successfully in loads of different ways. But I think in terms of the most acute or most visible aspect of the threat, it would be in their interference in our system, their influence throughout our system, principally through something that's called United Front work, linked to something called the United Front Work Department, but what is basically China's overseas influence organ. And that's a strong threat to us. Everybody acknowledges that. Like MI5, our security intelligence services, they acknowledge that. The Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament acknowledged that as our principal security threat. The MI5 director and FBI director got together in an almost unprecedented statement to say, this represents to us our most acute security threat. So, when you start to put those things together, you arrive at a picture that really makes the conclusion unavoidable that we are dealing with an adversary state that means to change our way of life and to make it more receptive to their aims, which are very different to ours. This is a very different value system. So yes, absolutely, China is a threat to the UK as we know it, and not just the UK, the rest of the world.
Are their ambitions more than the China ambitions, more than just economic gain? I mean, it's kind of understandable. Every country wants to have get ahead economically, and they need to pull out their many hundreds of millions of people from the poverty that they were in. Is it further beyond that?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, there's a big debate over whether or not China has imperial ambitions. And I think that you can settle that really when you look at their rhetoric over Taiwan, but also around the Philippines and some of those areas, some of those outlying islands, which are supposed to be settled matters of international law. China is trying to assert dominion over those areas. But if you leave aside the specific land grab stuff and look at the Belt and Road Initiative, through which they've poured hundreds of millions of dollars into infrastructure projects across the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, that has resulted in China being able to get its way in those countries, to shape the policy of those countries in a way that really reflects their own interests. I'll give you an example around this. So China's policy on Taiwan is very controversial. They try to say that international law tells them that they're able to take Taiwan effectively. And they want other countries to parrot that line so that they're able eventually to make that move and that there won't be any pushback throughout the United Nations or beyond. And the way that they've done that is to use their economic leverage to pressure countries, particularly more exposed economies in Africa, Pacific Islands, etc., to pressure them into adopting their line on Taiwan. This is pretty serious stuff. And I think if you frame it in the context of China's ambitions, you start to have to admit that their ambitions are beyond China. It's not just about the way that China rules itself. And beyond that, the international system as we know it, the United Nations, the post-war settlement is strongly threatened by the CCP's vision for it. They don't talk about democracy as we know it. They don't have democracy as we know it. They talk about democracy with Chinese characteristics. They talk about human rights with Chinese characteristics. These mean fundamentally different things. And that's the vision that they want to project on the rest of the world. So yeah, this isn't just, how does China get ahead? How does China become the global hegemon? This is, what would that mean under this leadership of China for the rest of the world and the way that we live our lives? And I think the conclusion is it means that those things are going to change and are already under serious pressure.
Thanks for watching this clip from The Winston Marshall Show. You can click here to watch the full episode. And for more clips like this one, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, be well.